Mount Etna has spent centuries reshaping itself through eruptions, collapses, fissures, and slow structural movement. But a newly observed fracture cutting across part of the volcano's upper flank has once again drawn attention to the constant changes taking place on Europe's most active volcano. The feature appears as a fresh, sharply defined crack extending across a steep ash-covered slope near the summit area, creating a visible break in terrain that previously appeared relatively continuous. Its appearance raises important questions about the current state of the volcano. Is the fracture simply the latest expression of Etna's routine structural adjustment? Does it reflect pressure changes within the volcanic edifice? Or is it another sign of the mountain's ongoing tendency to deform, crack, and rebuild itself as magma moves through one of the most complex volcanic systems on Earth? Current observations indicate that the fracture lies high on the volcano near the summit complex, in an area already shaped by repeated eruptions, crater growth, lava accumulation, and gravitational instability. The crack appears to cut across loose volcanic deposits and older surface layers, producing a jagged line that stretches laterally across the slope before continuing downslope through darker material. Freshly exposed rock and ash along portions of the fracture suggest recent formation or recent widening compared with surrounding surfaces. Mount Etna, located on the eastern coast of Sicily, rises more than 10,000 feet above sea level, exceeding 3,300 meters in elevation depending on the latest eruptive modifications to the summit. The volcano is not a single stable cone, but rather a vast volcanic complex that is continuously changing. New vents open, old craters collapse, lava fields accumulate, and fractures emerge as magma and volcanic gases interact with the structure of the mountain. These processes have been documented repeatedly throughout Etna's modern monitoring history. The newly observed fracture occupies a position where stresses naturally concentrate. Near the summit, layers of lava, ash, scoria, and volcanic debris are stacked upon one another, often resting on slopes that are already close to the angle at which material can begin to fail. When magma rises beneath the volcano, even without immediately erupting, pressure can alter the stress distribution throughout the volcanic edifice. Small adjustments occurring deep underground may eventually be expressed at the surface through cracking, subsidence, uplift, or localized slope movement. The geometry of the fracture is particularly noteworthy. Rather than appearing as a random surface crack caused solely by erosion, it displays characteristics consistent with structural deformation. The feature extends across a significant portion of the upper flank and exhibits an irregular but continuous trace. Several sections appear offset, suggesting that different portions of the slope may have moved relative to one another. Darker material visible below parts of the fracture may indicate recent rockfall, slumping, or minor collapse along the crack zone. Etna has a long history of generating fractures that later become pathways for volcanic activity. Throughout the volcano's documented history, eruptions have frequently begun when magma exploited pre-existing weaknesses within the mountain. Fissures can develop along zones where stress accumulates, allowing molten rock to eventually reach the surface. Not every crack becomes an eruptive vent, however. Many remain purely structural features that accommodate movement within the volcanic edifice. Others may remain dormant for years before becoming active. The summit region of Etna represents one of the most dynamic environments in European geology. Continuous volcanic activity repeatedly alters the landscape. Explosive eruptions build cones higher, while collapses remove material and create new depressions. Ash falls blanket existing surfaces, concealing older fractures until fresh movement reactivates them. The result is a terrain where change is not an exception, but a constant condition. Recent years have seen significant modifications to the volcano's summit area. Powerful eruptive episodes have added substantial volumes of volcanic material around the active craters. New cones have developed, crater rims have expanded, and portions of the summit have undergone repeated cycles of construction and collapse. Such changes inevitably influence the mechanical stability of surrounding slopes. Additional weight from accumulated lava and tephra can increase stress within the volcanic structure, making new fractures more likely to develop. The fracture's location near active degassing zones further increases scientific interest. Visible emissions of steam and volcanic gases continue from nearby summit vents. Gas release is a normal characteristic of Etna's activity, but gas pathways often follow fractures and structural weaknesses within the volcano. Existing cracks can become enlarged through repeated heating, cooling, and chemical alteration. Over time, these processes may weaken surrounding rock and contribute to further deformation. Volcanic fractures can form through several mechanisms. One possibility involves magma intrusion. In such cases, molten rock pushes upward through the crust, but does not necessarily erupt. Instead, it creates pressure that forces surrounding rock apart. The resulting fracture may reach the surface even if magma remains underground. Another possibility involves gravitational spreading, where the immense weight of the volcanic edifice causes portions of the flank to slowly move outward. A third mechanism involves localized collapse associated with crater growth or structural adjustment following eruptive activity. Etna is especially susceptible to flank movement. Geological studies have shown that large portions of the volcano experience gradual outward displacement over time. This movement occurs because the mountain is built upon complex geological foundations, and because its enormous mass continuously exerts pressure on underlying structures. Even in the absence of a major eruption, deformation can generate fractures that propagate across the surface. The visible characteristics of the new fracture appear consistent with brittle failure in unconsolidated volcanic material. The upper section cuts through darker deposits near the summit ridge before descending into lighter ash-covered terrain. Several segments show abrupt changes in direction, reflecting the influence of pre-existing weaknesses within the slope. Small collapsed scars and accumulations of darker debris below parts of the fracture suggest that some material has already detached and moved downslope. One notable aspect is the apparent freshness of the feature. Newly formed volcanic fractures often display sharp edges and strong contrast with surrounding terrain. Weathering gradually softens these characteristics over time. The fracture's distinct appearance indicates that it likely developed recently or has undergone recent reactivation. Freshly exposed surfaces commonly appear darker or lighter than older weathered deposits, depending on the composition of the volcanic material involved. The timing of the fracture's appearance is also significant because Etna has remained volcanically active through multiple recent episodes. The volcano entered new eruptive phases during the past year, including activity associated with fissure vents and lava flows in the Valle del Bove sector. One eruption earlier in the year involved lava emerging from a fissure located roughly 6,500 to 6,900 feet above sea level, or about 2,000 to 2,100 meters, demonstrating the volcano's continuing ability to open new pathways for magma movement. The Valle del Bove itself provides an important example of how fractures influence Etna's behavior. This vast horseshoe-shaped depression on the eastern flank acts as a natural channel for many lava flows. Numerous eruptions have originated along fissures that developed within or adjacent to this sector. Structural weaknesses created by earlier deformation often guide the location of subsequent activity. As a result, the emergence of any new fracture near the summit warrants careful observation. Historical records reveal that Etna's surface is repeatedly reorganized through cracking and faulting. Large fractures have appeared before major eruptions, during eruptive episodes, and after eruptive activity has subsided. Some have extended for miles across the volcano's flanks. Others have remained confined to summit areas. The diversity of these features reflects the complexity of forces operating within the mountain. The relationship between fractures and seismic activity is another important factor. Earthquakes frequently accompany deformation at Etna. Swarms of small earthquakes may occur as rock breaks under stress or as magma moves through underground pathways. Long-term monitoring has demonstrated a strong connection between changes in seismic patterns and evolving volcanic conditions. Variations in earthquake activity often provide valuable clues regarding stress accumulation and magma transport within the volcano. At present, the fracture itself does not automatically indicate that a major eruption is imminent. Volcanic systems regularly generate cracks without producing immediate eruptive activity. Nevertheless, such features are valuable because they reveal where stress is being concentrated and how the volcano is responding internally. Every fracture represents a physical expression of forces acting within the edifice. Etna's internal structure resembles a network of conduits, dikes, fractures, and reservoirs rather than a single vertical pipe. Magma can move through multiple pathways at varying depths. Research conducted over many years has documented the presence of numerous structural elements beneath the summit region, including fracture systems that evolve over time as volcanic activity progresses. These features can influence where future eruptions occur and how magma travels through the volcano. Another reason the fracture has attracted attention is its position relative to the summit craters. The upper portions of Etna experience intense thermal and mechanical stress. Repeated heating and cooling cycles weaken rock. Explosive activity ejects material and modifies crater walls. Lava accumulation changes slope angles. Gas emissions alter mineral composition. Together, these processes create conditions in which structural adjustments become increasingly likely. The visible crack appears to separate terrain exhibiting slightly different surface characteristics. On one side, the slope appears smoother and lighter in color, while darker deposits occupy adjacent areas. Such contrasts can sometimes indicate differing ages of volcanic material or varying degrees of consolidation. If movement occurred along the fracture, even by a relatively small amount, those differences could become more pronounced. Monitoring agencies routinely track deformation at Etna using a combination of ground-based instruments, satellite observations, thermal imaging, seismic networks, and gas measurements. These systems are designed to detect subtle changes long before they become obvious to casual observers. Surface fractures provide an additional source of information because they reveal deformation directly. When combined with instrumental data, they help establish whether movement is localized or part of a broader trend affecting the volcano. Satellite measurements have become particularly valuable for observing Etna's evolution. Modern instruments can detect millimeter-scale deformation across large areas, revealing whether portions of the volcano are inflating, deflating, or moving laterally. Such observations often identify structural changes, even when visibility at the summit is limited by weather or volcanic emissions. The broader geological setting also contributes to Etna's complexity. The volcano occupies a region influenced by interactions between the African and Eurasian tectonic plates. These regional forces create an environment where crustal stress is already significant. Volcanic processes operate within this tectonic framework, producing a system in which magma movement and structural deformation frequently interact. A fracture observed at the surface therefore represents only one part of a much larger picture. It may reflect localized slope adjustment. It may indicate ongoing deformation associated with deeper processes. It may eventually stabilize without further development. Alternatively, it may continue evolving as Etna enters future phases of activity. Past examples demonstrate that Etna is capable of rapidly modifying its summit architecture. Craters can expand dramatically within weeks. New vents can emerge along fractures. Lava accumulation can alter elevations by dozens of feet, equivalent to several meters. Conversely, collapses can remove substantial volumes of material in a relatively short period. These continual transformations make the volcano one of the most closely watched geological systems in the world. The newly observed fracture serves as another reminder that Etna remains a living volcanic structure rather than a fixed landscape. Every eruption, every lava flow, every gas emission, and every crack contributes to the ongoing evolution of the mountain. The feature now visible across the upper flank may ultimately prove to be a minor adjustment within a constantly changing edifice. It may also become part of a larger sequence of deformation that influences future activity. For now, the available evidence points to a fresh structural fracture affecting the summit area. Its sharp appearance, substantial length, and location within an active volcanic environment make it a feature worthy of close observation. Whether it remains simply a crack in the surface or develops into something more significant will depend on processes that continue to unfold deep within Mount Etna's complex volcanic system. As monitoring continues, the fracture offers a valuable window into the forces currently reshaping one of Earth's most active and closely studied volcanoes. Mount Etna's newly observed fracture inevitably invites comparison with other volcanoes around the world, where cracks, fissures, and structural breaks eventually preceded significant collapses. While every volcano operates under unique geological conditions, history shows that visible fractures on volcanic slopes often provide valuable clues about the internal stresses acting within a volcanic edifice. In some cases, these cracks remained relatively harmless. In others, they marked the beginning of dramatic structural failures that permanently altered entire mountains. One of the most frequently cited examples is the eruption of Mount Saint Helens in the northwestern United States during 1980. Months before the catastrophic eruption, scientists documented a large bulge growing on the volcano's northern flank. The swelling mountain was not simply expanding outward uniformly. Deep within the volcano, magma was forcing its way into the edifice, creating fractures and weakening the structure. Cracks appeared and widened as the volcano deformed. The instability eventually reached a critical point. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake triggered the collapse of the volcano's northern flank. What followed remains one of the largest landslides ever recorded. Approximately 2.5 cubic kilometers, or about 0.6 of a cubic mile, of rock detached from the mountain. The collapse instantly released pressure from the magma system, generating the famous lateral blast that devastated hundreds of square miles of forest. The situation at Etna differs substantially. There is currently no evidence of a massive bulging flank comparable to the one observed at Mount Saint Helens before 1980. Nevertheless, the lesson remains important. Fractures can reveal areas where volcanic structures are adjusting to internal pressure long before larger changes become apparent. Another noteworthy comparison comes from Anak Krakatau. For decades, this rapidly growing volcanic island accumulated lava and volcanic deposits above sea level. Repeated eruptions built steep, unstable slopes. Scientists had long recognized fractures and structural weaknesses along parts of the cone, although the precise timing of collapse remained impossible to predict. In late 2018, a large portion of the volcano's southwestern flank failed and slid into the sea. The collapse removed a significant section of the edifice, reducing the volcano's height by hundreds of feet and tens of meters. More importantly, the sudden displacement generated a deadly tsunami that spread across surrounding coastlines. The comparison with Etna highlights an important distinction. Mount Etna is vastly larger and possesses a much more complex internal plumbing system. However, both volcanoes share a common characteristic. Continuous construction through eruptions can eventually create unstable slopes. Every new lava flow, every layer of ash, and every accumulation of volcanic debris adds weight to the structure. Fractures may emerge where the mountain is struggling to accommodate that load. Perhaps an even more relevant example is found at Kilauea. Unlike the steep stratovolcanoes often associated with explosive eruptions, Kilauea is a shield volcano, yet it experiences extensive fracturing and structural movement. Large portions of its flanks slowly migrate seaward. Over decades, scientists have documented widening cracks, fault systems, and ground deformation across broad regions of the volcano. In 1975, a major earthquake associated with flank movement caused significant displacement along Kilauea's southern side. The event demonstrated that volcanic edifices can fail not only because of eruptions, but also because gravity continuously pulls massive volcanic structures outward. Mount Etna exhibits similar behavior. Geological measurements have shown that portions of Etna's eastern flank are slowly moving toward the Ionian Sea. The movement is generally measured in inches and centimeters per year, but over decades the cumulative displacement becomes substantial. The newly observed fracture near the summit may represent a local expression of stresses generated by this long-term deformation. The volcano of Piton de la Fournaise offers another valuable comparison. One of the most active volcanoes in the world, it frequently develops fractures as magma intrudes beneath the surface. Numerous eruptions have begun after cracks opened along the volcano's summit and flank regions. Some fractures eventually evolved into eruptive fissures stretching thousands of feet and hundreds of meters across the landscape. Repeated collapses have also occurred within its summit caldera. In several cases, ground cracking provided an early indication that structural adjustments were underway. Although these events were generally smaller than the catastrophic collapse at Mount Saint Helens, They demonstrate how rapidly volcanic landscapes can reorganize themselves. A more dramatic historical example comes from Mount Bandai. Before its catastrophic eruption in 1888, fractures and instability affected parts of the volcanic edifice. During the eruption, a massive sector collapse removed a substantial portion of the mountain. Entire valleys were buried beneath debris avalanches, permanently altering regional topography. The event serves as a reminder that volcanoes are not merely sources of lava and ash. They are also enormous geological structures whose stability can change over time. When fractures appear, volcanologists pay attention not simply because of eruption potential, but because they may indicate mechanical weakening within the edifice itself. Closer to Etna in geological character is Stromboli. Stromboli has experienced repeated slope failures associated with steep volcanic deposits accumulating on unstable terrain. Several collapses have involved portions of the Schiara del Fuoco, a large scar on the volcano's flank. Cracks and deformation frequently precede episodes of instability. Both Stromboli and Etna occupy tectonically active regions of Italy and share a history of persistent volcanic activity. However, Etna's much larger size means that deformation occurs across a broader and more complex network of faults, fractures, and moving sectors. One of the largest volcanic collapses known in geological history occurred at Mount Shasta thousands of years ago. Evidence indicates that a major section of the volcano failed catastrophically, generating a massive debris avalanche that traveled many miles and kilometers from its source. Geological studies suggest that long-term weakening and structural instability likely played a role before the collapse occurred. Such ancient examples are particularly important because they demonstrate that even seemingly stable volcanoes can experience enormous failures over geological timescales. The presence of a fracture alone does not indicate imminent danger, but fractures are often part of the broader processes that shape volcanic evolution.